And good Tuesday morning. My name is Ryan Belmore, and I'm the owner and publisher of WhatsUpNewp. And joining me, Mr. Frank Prosnitz. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing all right. I got the day right.
All right, good deal. We were on with a Zoom meeting yesterday. You look like you're feeling a little better.
Sinuses, allergies, sinuses. It's that time of the season, I guess.
Tis the season, indeed.
That's it. Very important conversation. Speaking of tis the season, annual housing book is out from HousingWorks RI.
We focused on affordable housing over the last few years, and I can't think of very many issues that are more important than this. And that it's amazing that a third of our population is affected because of lack of affordable housing, the issues and things that it has to do with our healthcare system, with all kinds of things, crosses everything. And Brenda Clement, who is director of HousingWorks RI, is joining us this morning. She has this organization has done amazing work over the years, and this latest report is illuminating. In some ways, it's hopeful, and in other ways, it's disheartening. So we're going to come right down in the middle. Good morning, Brenda.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me back. I joke all the time that I'll talk about housing whether I'm invited to or not. So you remember, you invited me.
We did indeed. But it's an amazingly important issue that sometimes doesn't get the attention that it should get.
I agreed. Although thankfully, we stars seem to be aligning, and more attention has been paid to it over the last couple of years. A lot of interest in both state and local political leadership on it. Rhode Island Foundation just released their recommendations this morning about how they would suggest spending or concentrating the federal relief dollars, and housing is top on the list. So that's all good news, as I said, and gives me cause for optimism that this issue's time has finally come.
Well, we had passed the $65 million bond, and then a $4 million funding stream each year. That's helpful, but doesn't get us out of last place in New England.
That's correct. It is certainly a good start, better than nothing, right? But still puts us behind all of our other colleagues. And also, as we know, we've got a lot of catch up to do. We have just simply been underproducing housing at all income levels, but particularly at the lower income level for a number of years. Really, our peak building time was back in 1940 through 1979 was when we saw peak building, and a big drop off since 2000. So we've got a lot of backup and catch up work to do with that money and resources.
So affordable housing is not only a Rhode Island issue. This is a national issue, probably a worldwide issue, I would suspect. Where in the overall scope of things, where does Rhode Island stand? Are we middle of the road? Are we lagging behind in affordable housing? We ahead of people?
So we're often in the top third of challenge of groups that need more affordable housing. No surprise to anybody, the East Coast housing market is an expensive market. We're right smack in the middle of both New York and Boston, which exert a lot of influence and pressure on the market here in the region as well too. And so housing, so we tend to rank in the top 10, top 15 percent of states with a challenge for affordable housing. Depending on the indicator, oftentimes we're even higher and in the top 5, particularly around age of housing. We definitely have some of the oldest housing stock in the country.
So one of the things that you concentrate on in your report is, in fact, just that, the age of our housing stock, and how much of it was built prior to certain safety regulations. And you're quick to point out that a lot of housing has really been kept up, while some others certainly hasn't. And I was thinking that really puts the Northeast in particular in a different place than perhaps where housing is newer, where we get out to the West and West Coast, where their housing stock is not quite as old as ours.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, housing of any age can lead to health risks, right? If it's not maintained or kept clean, chipping paint, leaks, mold, pest infestation, trigger and worsen any number of illnesses and disease, but particularly asthma and asthma rates. And as you know, we uh, put a focus on some of those health indicators in our Factbook this year, working closely with our great colleagues at Department of Health. Rhode Island, talk about rankings. Rhode Island is fifth highest has the fifth highest rates for adult and children's asthma. And, particularly this past year and a half, as we've lived through a pandemic that is a largely respiratory airborne disease, these asthma rates and people who have underlying conditions have been even at more risk. So housing and keeping and maintaining housing, I've said to you before, our goals always as housing groups are to help people attain, maintain, and retain their housing. And maintenance, getting people in housing is critical, but helping them make sure that housing stays safe and affordable is also critical for their ability to retain it.
Does some of that fall upon education of individuals in how they're able to maintain their facilities?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously lots of great things and information that people can do. A lot of the programs to help with weatherization, and obviously quality and condition is critical, but also maintaining your house, improving windows or replacing windows, and others also help with ongoing maintenance costs and heating costs for these properties as well too, which is often a significant problem and factor for homeowners and renters. But through partnerships with groups like Green and Healthy Housing and the work that we do with a program that we administer called the Rhode Island Alliance for Healthy Homes, getting the word out to individuals and people about programs and resources that exist out there. And then hopefully, if the legislature and the governor agrees, investing even more money into these programs that we know work, but just are generally always very oversubscribed. They run out of money faster than the need is met.
So we hear the term affordable housing all the time. What is affordable housing?
So affordable housing is really just everybody needs affordable housing, right? It's just a factor of your income and what housing costs are in your area or community. So if you, if you're a millionaire and houses are only available for billions of dollars, you've got an affordability gap. Obviously, that's an absurd or an extreme example as well. But we know, and according to the data in our annual Factbook, that many, many Rhode Islanders are priced out of the market or cost burden. Even if you're earning $50,000 or a year or less, you can only affordably rent in two communities, in Burrillville and Woonsocket. If you're earning the state's median renter income of $36,000, you can only afford to rent in Burrillville. So those are many, many workers in Rhode Island. And if you're spending more than a third of your income towards housing, you're considered cost burden or spending too much of your annual income on housing.
So these people who are cost burdened are making decisions about how they spend their money, whether it be on rent or mortgage, whether it be on food, whether it be on medications. They're cutting something out.
That's correct. Or they're doubling up, or they're moving frequently, or doing other things to kind of keep a roof over their head. When you're cost burden at a higher income level, the choice may be that you don't buy a second car, or you don't go on a vacation, or you don't put as much money towards savings or retirement, which can have long-term impacts, obviously, but they're not dire choices like choosing between rent and eating or rent and medication.
So I'm looking at the Newport page in the book, and I wonder, because Newport has these amazing mansions that are worth an extraordinary amount of money, and it shows a median single family home price of $625,000. but that doesn't truly represent what the community is.
No, I mean, in many cases, and this is true in a lot of communities, Newport is very much a tale of two cities, right, with a very, very high-end market. But when you look at other and a more lower moderate income level, I think what's happening a lot in Newport is the difficulty of more middle class individuals to be able to stay in Newport and to be able to afford to stay in their homes as well too. In our Factbook, we also report on the housing cost numbers and the gap between income for the projected growth occupations in our state from 2018 to 2028, and many of those are workers that Newport and Aquidneck Island rely on for a tourism industry: food prep, waiters, waitresses, cooks, retail salespeople, janitors, maids, housekeeping. All of these people are priced out of the market. And so particularly an area like Newport that has a large percentage of low tourism-based jobs, those workers struggle to not only find housing, but to keep that housing.
And I think conversely, if you, in terms of a city like Newport, if they can't find the housing in Newport and are looking elsewhere, then they find it more difficult from a transportation standpoint to be able to work in Newport, and will find jobs closer to home.
That's exactly right. And so, it makes getting to work, it means keeping a job and being consistent at that job even more difficult for workers to do.
Rhode Island is one of 6 communities that have met the 10% threshold that we have for Rhode Island for cities and towns to have affordable housing. Why? And that's been static, right? We haven't heard. What is the impediment for many of these towns to move forward? And I also think about towns like Foster, where you have minimum house lots of an acre in some places. That's got to be a challenge.
Yeah, zoning is a huge issue. Our zoning ordinances and laws and state enabling legislation is close to 40 years old plus, and lots has changed, right? And growth patterns have changed during that time period. And so taking a look at those and looking at where it makes sense to concentrate development, where it makes sense around transportation hubs and other places or existing business centers, where it makes sense to concentrate, but looking at how we can reduce zoning barriers is definitely something that we need to address as a state. As we've talked before, that there's a land use commission that the state legislature has convened on the House side that's starting to look at some of these issues as well too. The Low Mod Commission chaired by Rep. Speakman from East Bay is looking at the Low Mod Act itself to see what incentives we can do to try to budge that number from 6 up to much higher.
Hey, Frank.
Hey, Ryan.
Just because Brenda just brought up Rep. Speakman, I do want to give a shout out that the Newport Democratic City Committee on Thursday night is hosting the second in their series on their Newport Housing Crisis panel series. It's part 2. Rep. Speakman is one of the guests there, as well as the Lieutenant Governor and the Director of Government Relations and Policy for Rhode Island Housing. And it is taking place here at 7 p.m. on Zoom. And I will drop the link in the comments so people, we're not the only ones who should be or can be speaking about housing. So I'm glad to see this event as well. And just wanted to give it a quick shout out.
Well, it's just such a huge issue. The more attention we pay to it, the more likelihood we can find solutions.
Yeah, and and I am very heartened by the increased attention and awareness, but we also need to start doing stuff too. We need to start building. We need to start acquiring properties. We need to start getting people housed. We have record numbers of people who are unsheltered outside, living outside than we've seen before. We've seen a huge uptick in unsheltered adults from 2020 to 2021, a jump of almost 68%, and it's unconscionable. We've seen an uptick in number of homeless students in schools as well too, and we know that's only the tip of the iceberg and doesn't really capture couch surfing, housing instability, housing unstable families as well too, that often force families and kids to have to switch schools, often in the middle of a school year, and which sets them way behind in their learning goals, obviously. So
We're talking
we've got a lot
about
of work to do, but
yeah.
we need to stop talking and we need to start building.
We're talking about 1,500 kids, right? Who have been identified as homeless in our schools.
That's correct. And those are kind of ones officially identified, but as we said, we're fairly confident that's an undercount.
Have we, and maybe this is more of a question for Kids Count, have we tracked what happens to some of these kids who are homeless, and what happens as they progress through life?
Those are all really great questions. I am not aware of any kind of regular tracking that goes on. I will say, as you can guess, there's why I say that number is probably largely undercounted, is because there's great fear among families and individuals to identify as homeless. And so these numbers generally tend to be people who are in the shelter system already. But many people, particularly families, are concerned that their children will be taken away if they don't have a place to live, or that they're housing unstable, and so they don't report it. The unfortunate part of that is that they don't always get the services and support that they need because of that as well too. But you can understand the dilemma.
Interestingly, people look at those people and they have some they're misguided in the kinds of people who we see as homeless or we see as housing deprived. I became aware of an individual, a family, that they were living in a tent, and the father was a freelance painter, house painter. During the pandemic, almost impossible to get work, and really struggling. A child who I think was disabled in one way or another. He was a hardworking guy. Trying to make a living, and things came crashing down on him, and ends up with his family in a tent, and we don't have any place for him to go.
Yeah. No, unfortunately, that story is all too common. And with cost burden numbers of 35% of our population, or 1 out of every 3 Rhode Islanders have housing issues and challenges. Everybody knows somebody, or has somebody in their family, or knows somebody within their network that struggles with housing. So it's an issue that needs to be addressed, and needs to be addressed now.
We have one of the older populations in the country, or do we have a disproportionate number of seniors who are housing deprived?
We don't have a disproportionate number, but we have a very aging population. As we said, just in a few years' time, 1 out of every 4 Rhode Islanders will be 65 years or older. And so that creates some unique challenges for them as they try to age in place or age in community, and often need different support services to do that. So our increase, so we're one of the high growth states for seniors, but not the highest growth, but trying to help people be able to stay in their homes for as long as they can requires a lot of support from workers who are the fastest growing jobs in our state, but are also some of the lowest wage growing jobs.
When you look through the Factbook, what are the things that jump out at you as the most startling, and the things that we need to address quickest?
So again, COVID, has shot a spotlight on the health disparities that we knew existed before COVID, but was certainly exacerbated or shown as critical that we addressed as COVID hit. But the other thing that COVID also showed us is the economic, the racial disparities. Again, These have existed for a long period of time, but the spotlight was shown on them one more time as COVID brought on, as we know, an economic meltdown and job losses of unprecedented levels as well too, that disproportionately hit minority populations. One of the numbers that sticks out hugely in my head is that the homeownership rates for white households in Rhode Island is 68%, which is double that of Black households and more than double for Latinos. Our Black and Latino homeowner rates are still well below the national average, in addition to varying and comparing badly to the white homeownership rate. And homeownership, as we know, is a critical tool to create economic stability for your family. And for way too many Rhode Islanders, that opportunity has been lost for several generations.
Is the barrier for minorities purely economic?
It's economic. It's supply, on multiple levels. It's supply, obviously. It's financing and mortgage products. I mean, we're still cleaning up the mess from bad policies around redlining and lack of investment into minority neighborhoods and communities as well too. I mean, in any discussion of affordable housing and housing development in general, we can't discount the undercurrent of racism and classism. And those issues, sadly, are alive and well, and are often misconceptions in communities and misunderstandings in communities, but still often prevent the building and development of housing where it's needed.
So I wonder, in this, we have all this talk of critical race theory, misguided talk of critical race theory, because it's not taught in our public schools. It's taught on a higher education level, and even then, not to a great degree. But it seems that, and I guess we've seen in Texas the evil coming out even more when we seem to have an element that creeps up once more about Holocaust deniers, that we use this term to really try to convince that we don't teach the history of racism in this country in order for us to learn from that and to move forward. That's a really long, crazy statement, but is that out of line, or am I?
No, I mean, I personally agree with you. I think, zoning and other regulatory barriers, federal policies around redlining and mortgage, who had access to mortgages and homeowner insurance and other things, we're misconceived and badly thought out policies on the federal level that are still having ripple effects in communities, particularly communities of color, as I said, for several generations. I mean, a lot of these homeownership numbers, both in Rhode Island and nationally, have not budged significantly since the late 60s, early 70s. We've made, little or no progress on improving those rates. There is history, and this history that we have to discuss and own and figure out how to repair.
When you take a look at where we're at now, and you see certain things that give us a little bit of hope, certainly the fact that, when we have forums like that going on in Newport later this week, those are very hopeful. What are our hopeful signs? What should our major objectives be over the next 12 months?
Well, I mean, I am more hopeful than I have been for a long time. I've been doing this work for a long time, started in my own community in Pawtucket and creating a nonprofit developer with my church to build and develop housing many years ago, almost 25 years ago now. So there's hope for a couple of reasons. One is that it's getting a lot of attention on many fronts. As you know, you already referred to a forum. I'm coming to Newport in a couple of weeks to talk with the Realtor Association and other groups. So there's a lot of individuals interested in this topic and interested in working towards solution. The governor has included housing recommendations in his 2030 plan that is out for comments and draft. in draft. It's out in draft form for comments. There's a number of public meetings and public hearings coming up at that. So we're hopeful that a lot of people will talk about housing at those meetings. We mentioned earlier that Rhode Island Foundation has just Rhode Island Foundation, Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council, and Economic Progress Institute have come together to pull together a series of recommendations around how to spend those federal dollars, and housing features prominently and is top on that list as well too. So politically, the Speaker's office and our new speaker has said publicly a number of times that housing is a key priority for him, and we hear similar sentiments on the Senate side. So political stars are aligning at the same time that we're going to see a big infusion of federal dollars, and as you already mentioned, thanks to the state voters, some infusion of state dollars as well too. We have not seen this alignment for a long time, really, since the 80s. So we're excited and encouraged that this is the chance that we've been waiting for.
Many people in communities associate affordable housing with low income and poor housing, when that's not the case. Often we find mixed use buildings. What I mean mixed use is it's affordable housing, it's higher end housing. The very same unit can be priced differently based upon somebody's income.
Right. And that's why a tool like the Low Moderate Income Housing Act that allows for a local review process. And I want to be clear, the local partners and the local cities and towns are critical pieces of this system. Without them, they control the zoning and the land use and other things, but they're critical partners in this work, and work closely with many of the nonprofit developers, the community development corporations. You have one of the premier groups in your neck of the woods and Newport area church community housing corporation that has built hundreds of units across the region that I would stack up against any development and point to it with pride as an asset to a neighborhood and community. We've come a long way in the affordable housing space. I know people immediately think of projects, ugly buildings and big brick, monstrosities. The reality is that affordable housing today, created by developed by the community development corporations, are assets to communities. We're also looking at ways to rehab, repurpose, and reuse existing buildings in neighborhoods and communities as well, to return them to local tax rolls. So affordable housing is not something to be feared. It is something to be welcomed in your community.
Seen some wonderful work done on some old buildings that I remember years ago. I think it's the Lockwood School in Warwick that was turned into a beautiful apartment complex. Yep. And lots of different, some of these beautiful old buildings that we look as abandoned become wonderful places for rehabs.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we should be doing. It's better for the environment, better for the local community to restore that property back to a tax roll, makes it safer and less likely to be subject to fire or other environmental issues or challenges as well. In addition to church community, you also have some great housing authorities in the neighborhood and area, and Newport Housing Authority has done a great job not only maintaining their portfolio of public housing, but also adding and improving that portfolio extensively. So there's lots of great local partners and local players who are trying to work with with the cities and towns in the region to address the issue of workforce.
Brenda, we're almost out of time. I wanted to, where can people get the housing Factbook? And it's well worth. It's I forget how many pages it is, but it's not all that long. It's well worth reading and digesting, particularly for people who are in the real estate market, people who are on various town boards and commissions. Very important stuff to understand as we move forward. And there's so much that we could talk about. Where can they find this?
So you can download a copy of it on our website. You can download and print out copies. You can also search through the Factbook on our website with some searchable tools and clicking on different things. I think I see the banner scrolling our website address, HousingWorksRI.org. If you'd like a physical copy, please just reach out to either me or Amy Kohler, our communications director, and we're happy to make arrangements to send a Factbook to you. I joked earlier that I'm always happy to talk about housing issues, and so we regularly come out to make presentations about the Factbook once it's released as well too. And our calendars are filling up with groups that want to talk about this issue, which is great and exciting to hear. So on our website, and let us know if you want a hard copy.
Brenda, is there anything that we missed this morning that you think is important that we add?
No, again, just, I remain hopeful that we can really move forward. I do, am sensitive to the fact that some of this is stuff that we need to move quickly on, particularly to address unsheltered individuals as winter approaches. It's cold out there today, and it's going to get a lot colder before it gets warmer again. And we've got to work fast to address those immediate needs. But then, again, this is not an incurable disease. We know how to fix this. We need to build more units.
Brenda, thank you very much. Ryan, you have anything before we?
I don't. I just wanted to remind people that that discussion will take place this Thursday on Zoom, 7 p.m. And you can learn a lot more about housing forum being held by Newport Democratic City Committee. And I'm sure there's a lot more where, Brenda, you guys probably have newsletters and things where people can get updates and get involved and support your work. And
yep. If you go to our website, you can find out more information on that. We're also part of an advocacy group called homeowners.org, which is the way that all the housing groups are trying to coordinate our advocacy efforts. And so individuals can join Homes RI as well too. So we encourage people to help add their voice to the mix.
Brenda, as we go along, we're going to have you on more often, talking about what is a really, really important issue.
Well, what I really want to go to more ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings and other things. But always happy to talk about it. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Brenda.
Right. Mr. Prosnitz, great discussion. If anybody missed any portion of this, they can find it on our website. You can watch it afterwards. You can share it with people. And again, to find the fact books, you can find it at HousingWorksRI.org. And you can follow all of our affordable housing coverage right on WhatsUpNewp.com. Just search for affordable housing.
Very good. Thank you, Ryan.
All right, Mr. Prosnitz. And on behalf of Frank, as well as all of us here at WhatsUpNewp, we want to thank Brenda Clement for joining us and HousingWorksRI.org. That's going to do it for us today. Thanks for watching.